All right, folks, tonight we're stepping straight into the past. No time machines required. We're going to Long Island, to a street called Ocean Avenue, and a house that sits very quietly, watching the tide roll in. It's late, just past 3:15 a.m. On November 13th, 1974, and you are standing outside 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. The night air is crisp, carrying that specific, damp smell of late autumn near the sea. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the faint, muffled sound of waves easing onto the shore of the Great South Bay, just a few blocks away. It's the kind of peaceful coastal quiet that makes you feel profoundly safe, which is a magnificent trick the universe is playing on you right now. Because inside this handsome, 3-story Dutch colonial, something terrible has just happened. You walk toward the structure, its famous high, eye-like windows staring back at you like they've just witnessed something they'd rather forget. This isn't the haunted house from a movie. It's just a house, heavy with dark wood and a recently refreshed white paint job. It looks like the kind of place you'd pass on a Sunday drive and wish you could afford. It's an American dream, slightly askew. Honestly, you wouldn't make it an hour out here. Most people today would tap out before sunrise. Survival score. A generous 1 star. The sheer, cold weight of the silence would probably be enough to send you sprinting back to your heated blanket and phone charger. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Let the soft whir of a fan set the mood, and together, we'll slip into the night's journey. Tonight, we're not here to chase shadows or screams. We're here to look at the atmosphere, the strange, cold, historical residue of a story that simply refuses to let go. We're here to find the unidentified ghost, not necessarily the supernatural entity, but the lingering presence that resides in the truth, the lies, and the simple, physical facts of the house. You are now inside the front door. The air here is instantly heavier, like walking into a cellar after a sunny day. It's not just cold, it's a specific thermal anomaly. This is a curious detail that the police and investigators who first entered the house reported. Not a ghostly chill, but a factual, measurable coldness that settled in the upper rooms, even with the heat on. The house, at this hour, is a historical artifact in amber. It's frozen in a moment of sheer, devastating quiet. Ronald DeFeo, Jr. has just left, completing a horrifying act that took the lives of his parents and 4 younger siblings, 6 people in total. The weapon, a .35 caliber Marlin rifle, is now silent. Walk carefully up the staircase. The wood doesn't creak, which is oddly unnerving. This house is too quiet. You reach the 2nd floor. The layout is classic and practical. A master bedroom, several smaller rooms for the children, and a couple of bathrooms. The historical fact is that all 6 victims were found face down in their beds, having apparently been asleep when the shots were fired. The precision and the quietude of the murders have always been a central, baffling truth of the case. Look at the hallway. There is no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no desperate dash for safety. It's almost neat, which adds a layer of surreal professionalism to the tragedy. It begs the unsettling question, how could 6 people, ranging from 9 to 43 years old, all be eliminated with such hushed, deadly efficiency? It is the historical question mark that hangs over the entire story, long before any talk of ghosts began. It's almost as if the atmosphere itself absorbed the noise. A little detail to hold on to: the neighbors, who were very close, reported hearing nothing at all that night. Absolutely nothing. The official theory centered on the belief that a silencer must have been used on the rifle. But the rifle was never recovered with one, and the noise should have carried. As you stand here, right now, in this second-floor hallway, you can feel the ghost of the sound that wasn't made. It's the sound of 6 heartbeats that simply stopped, without a struggle, without a cry. It's the first historical mystery we encounter, the curious silence of 112 Ocean Avenue. The house is already building its own, terrifying narrative of quiet compliance. Now, we follow that chill deeper into the night. The cold air here on the second floor is beginning to feel less like a normal draft and more like an invisible, heavy blanket. You can feel the hairs on your arms trying to stand up, but they can't quite manage it. The air is too still, too compressed. It's the kind of silence you might find miles away from civilization, not in the heart of a Long Island suburb. This is the unnatural stillness that the initial responding officers documented, a stillness that defied the violent event that had just occurred. You move slowly down the hall, guided by an unseen current, toward the bedroom where the parents, Ronald S.R. and Louise DeFeo, were found. There is an absolute, pervasive lack of movement here. It's an unnerving historical detail. The scene was almost tidy. If you've ever moved quickly in your sleep, trying to escape a bad dream or find a comfortable spot, you know that the slightest disturbance leaves a trace, a twisted sheet, a misplaced pillow. Here, there are almost none. It's as if the moment of transition was perfectly executed, or perhaps simply accepted. Think about the sheer logistical difficulty of this event. 6 shots in 6 separate bodies, all aimed with lethal intent, all without generating an immediate, chaotic reaction. If Ronald DeFeo Jr. truly acted alone, this wasn't a crime of passionate rage, but one of terrifying, cold-blooded efficiency. It's the efficiency that chills you, far more than the thought of a conventional, screaming struggle. You lean against the door frame, which is cool to the touch. The scent in the air is faint, maybe the residual metallic ghost of gunpowder mixed with the clean, dated scent of old upholstery. It smells like a house that was dearly loved but suddenly abandoned. The lack of blood splatter outside the beds themselves adds to the unsettling clinical nature of the scene. It's an unusual historical footnote for a mass murder, minimal collateral damage. It suggests a certain chilling control. Now, consider the beds themselves. They are large, heavy antique frames, and the 6 people inside them were of varying weights and sizes. For all of them to remain in the same, undisturbed positions, face down, often described as almost mummy-like, it forces you to confront the unsettling possibility of something beyond human force. The mystery isn't who did it, as the court decided that. The mystery is how it was done with such impossible, silent precision. I mean, honestly, getting one person to sleep through anything is a monumental task. My dog can't sleep through a bag of chips being opened in another room. But 6 people, sleeping through the sound of a high-powered rifle. It's the kind of scenario that stretches the limits of plausible explanation, even with a theoretical silencer. It's the kind of thing you'd only achieve if you were holding a remote control for the whole house. This very odd, quiet precision is what creates the first opening for the unidentified presence. When a historical event lacks a reasonable human explanation, people look for an unreasonable one. If the bodies didn't move, perhaps they couldn't move. If they didn't cry out, perhaps they were prevented from crying out. This is the seed of the supernatural claim, the feeling that some external, immobilizing force must have been at play. You walk toward one of the smaller children's rooms. The sheer innocence of the setting is a heavy counterpoint to the violence. You see the faint outline of where a toy chest might have sat, or a desk where homework was done. This room, more than any other, feels like a wound. And it's here, in the cold, quiet historical record, that the first true ghost of the Amityville Horror emerges, the ghost of logic. It's the uncomfortable feeling that the facts on the ground do not line up with the man who confessed to the crime. This is the central mystery that persists today, one that scholars and true crime buffs debate quietly. Was it truly just Ron DeFeo Jr., acting alone? Or was there an accomplice? The house's unnerving quiet gives oxygen to the thought that something else was in the room, something unseen, something that held the family in place with a certain kind of silence. This silence is the original haunting, the structural flaw in the historical narrative that the supernatural claims rushed in to fill. And that lingering chill, it's a measurable fact. We'll follow that coldness next. You stand now in the middle of a small, second-floor bedroom where two of the younger children slept. The windows are tall, letting in the faint, watery light of the pre-dawn Long Island sky. You can almost see your breath, which is the historical curiosity we're focusing on, the sustained, localized cold. It's easy to dismiss a chill in a large, old house. Houses built in the 1920s, like this Dutch colonial, were not known for their perfect insulation. But the records from the initial police entry speak of an abnormal, sharp drop in temperature on the second floor, specifically around the bedrooms. This wasn't just a draft. It was a distinctive, heavy cold that felt wrong. Think of it like this. Your house might have a cold spot near a leaky window, sure. But imagine a spot that feels like an unplugged freezer is operating right next to you, while the thermostat downstairs says everything is normal. This wasn't the kind of cold you could blame on a Victorian radiator or a simple hole in the wall. This was a physical, historical marker that suggested a profound, local energy drain. This thermal anomaly is the true, original, supernatural element of the Amityville case, long before the Lutz family ever moved in. It's the grounding truth that the later, wilder stories, the pigs and the slime and the glowing eyes, had to latch onto to gain any credibility. They could always point back to the beginning and say, but the police reports mention the cold. What was that? The cold is insidious, creeping in under the door and settling on your shoulders. It doesn't feel like a winter morning. It feels like the absence of warmth, a vacuum where thermal energy should be. It's a sensory experience that forces you to consider the second law of thermodynamics, which basically states that heat should equalize. But here, in this tragic space, that law seems to be suspended. Now, for a quirky little detail that often gets lost in the sensationalism, the initial reports mention the house was fully furnished and the table downstairs was set for dinner. They were living a normal suburban life right up until the moment of the crime. This suggests that whatever happened was not the slow build-up of financial ruin or chronic domestic despair, but a sudden, sharp break. The cold seems to represent that break, an abrupt descent into a state of less than life. Consider the possibility of the DeFeo family dynamics as the source of the initial cold. Ronald, S.R. and Louise had a famously tumultuous relationship, fraught with arguments and alleged abuse. Could the tension itself have been so thick, so pervasive, that it created a palpable atmosphere of dread? Could the emotional temperature of the house have been so low that it manifested, physically, as a cold spot? It's a psychological theory, a curious anecdote about the relationship between physical space and emotional history. The house remembers, not with spectral screams, but with a profound, structural sigh. You walk over to a window. The glass is clear, but when you touch it, it's not just cool, it's icy. You look out at the yard, which is currently bathed in that flat, unrevealing light of early morning. You're looking for a footprint, a discarded cigarette, anything that would indicate the presence of an accomplice or a witness. There is nothing. Just quiet grass, a small boat dark down the street, and the vast, cold water of the bay. This leads us to the hint of mystery, the ghost of the accomplice. The court found Ronald Jr. acted alone, but the sheer physics of the crime, the silence, the positions, the speed, suggest a logistical difficulty that leans toward two people, or at least a highly detailed, premeditated plan executed with almost supernatural calm. If there was a second person, they were a ghost from the very start, leaving no trace, making no sound. And perhaps that accomplice, be it a human or an unseen force, brought the cold with them. You take a deep breath, trying to warm yourself against the insidious cold of the historical record. It's a reminder that sometimes the most mundane historical facts, like a measurable drop in temperature, are the most terrifying because they defy easy explanation. They leave a vacuum, and that vacuum is where the next part of the story, the unusual and sensational, will rush in to fill. That vacuum is exactly where the police reports will become strangely silent on the next crucial detail. The neighbors. The cold follows you as you retreat down the main staircase, placing your hand on the banister to steady yourself. The wood is smoother than you expected, cool and polished by decades of hands. You are now back on the first floor, in the formal living room. The historical record, which has been eerily cold and silent upstairs, begins to warm up just a little here as the human element, the investigators and the police, begins to arrive. The initial report from the police was clinical, dry, and terrifyingly brief. It spoke of 6 fatalities, an identified perpetrator, and a rifle. The goal of the early investigation was simple: containment and classification. They weren't looking for spectral entities or thermal anomalies. Well, not officially. They were looking for motive, opportunity, and means. The grounding in history here is the very ordinariness of the police procedure. Think of the 1970s detective, a practical person, focused on evidence, fingerprints, and the paperwork. They would have been entirely focused on the tragic reality of Ronald DeFeo Jr. and his immediate confession. The 6 bodies upstairs were a devastating, undeniable fact. The narrative, as far as the police were concerned, was largely closed once the shooter was in custody. The unusual detail is the sheer, almost immediate skepticism the story faced, even at this early stage. The police, while accepting the confession, reportedly wrestled with the logistics. How could a young man in a state of alleged drug-fueled frenzy have executed such a silent, tidy, and comprehensive crime? They ran through scenarios, testing distances, bullet trajectories, and yes, the sound factor. They tried to make the human facts fit the physical evidence, and they kept finding snags. There's a small, heavy vase on a side table. You pass your hand over it. It's undisturbed. It's the lack of chaos that is so hard to reconcile. If Ronald Jr. was truly acting in a fit of pure madness, the house should be a scene of frantic disarray. But it wasn't. It was, as one officer allegedly noted, almost preserved. It was as if the violence had been meticulously edited out, leaving only the chilling, static result. This is where the first whisper of the story truly begins, not with a ghost, but with a journalistic hunch. The local papers, hungry for detail in this devastating suburban tragedy, started to pick at the seams of the police report. Why were the children not covered by blankets? Why was one of the younger girls found with her head tilted to the side in such an unnatural way? These weren't necessarily paranormal questions. They were human questions that hinted at manipulation or staging. I mean, the police must have felt like they were trying to put together a Swedish flat-pack furniture kit, only to find 3 major pieces missing and 1 piece made of silk. It just didn't fit together with the simple instructions they had. The hint of mystery here is the missing silencer. A rifle, even a quiet one, makes a substantial crack indoors. The lack of any audible alarm, not from the 6 victims and critically, not from the nearby neighbors, demanded the presence of a silencer. But a silencer was never found. This small, crucial piece of missing evidence is the ghost of the weapon. It forces the historian, or the curious sleeper, to choose between 2 unsettling possibilities. Either a physical object vanished, or the laws of sound itself were strangely suspended on Ocean Avenue that night. The story starts here, in the police precinct, in the quiet frustration of professionals trying to reconcile a simple confession with impossible evidence. They had their suspect, they had their bodies, but they didn't have a story that felt entirely true. And when a story doesn't feel true, it creates a void. That void is where the Lutzes will eventually step, and where the most famous, fictional, and frightening versions of the Amityville ghost will take root. But first, we must examine the most baffling component of the physical evidence, the deafening silence outside the walls. You step out onto the front porch of 112 Ocean Avenue. It's colder out here now that the sun has risen a little, casting a pale, indifferent light over the quiet, tree-lined street. You can see the neighboring houses clearly. They are close, separated only by thin strips of lawn. This proximity is the key historical detail we need to focus on right now. The grounding in history is the simple geographical layout of the neighborhood. This is a dense suburban area. The houses share driveways, fences, and most importantly, sound. A high-powered rifle being fired 6 times inside a thin-walled Dutch colonial would, under normal circumstances, create a significant noise event. It's not a muted pop, it's a thunderous crack that would instantly wake the next-door neighbors. And yet, we return to the curious lack of neighbors reporting anything. This fact, more than any alleged slime or flying objects, is the unusual detail that provides the true structural mystery of the case. No calls to the police about gunshots, no sudden awakenings. No frantic running into the street. Silence. Think about your own neighborhood. If a single car backfired loudly late at night, you'd probably wake up and check the window. 6 rifle shots, repeated over a few minutes, would be absolutely impossible to sleep through, especially given the age of the homes and the lack of modern, heavy-duty soundproofing. This leads directly to the hint of mystery, the ghost of the silencer's efficacy. The working theory, which we touched upon earlier, was that DeFeo Jr. must have used a sound suppression device. But how effective would a homemade or even a standard silencer have been on a .35 Marlin rifle? Experts today argue that while a suppressor cuts down on the muzzle blast, it can't eliminate the distinct supersonic crack that happens when the bullet breaks the sound barrier. The sound should still have been heard by the neighbors. It's tempting to think that perhaps the neighbors were deep sleepers, or had their windows closed, or maybe they just didn't want to get involved. Classic suburban apathy. But the degree of silence stretches the limits of that explanation. It suggests that if the victims were somehow immobilized or kept quiet, The neighbors were too, perhaps by a combination of closed windows and the house itself acting as an unnatural insulator. The house almost becomes an active participant in the crime, a silent co-conspirator. It enclosed the violence, muffling the terror, and creating a perfect, sound-dampened chamber for the tragedy to unfold. This is the playful exaggeration that creeps into the narrative. The house didn't just hold the secret, it sealed it in with concrete and wood. You can walk across the street now, looking back at the house. From this vantage point, you see those iconic 2 windows on the 3rd floor, like heavy, brooding eyes under the steep roofline. Imagine standing here at 3:15 a.m. on November 13th, 1974. You'd be listening for a police siren, a child's cry, anything. You hear only the wind coming off the bay. This overwhelming silence is the second major ghost of the Amityville story, the ghost of the witness. The sheer lack of external witnesses provides a clean slate for the later, more spectacular claims. If the immediate human environment was deaf and blind to the historical event, then the story has no external check. It opens the door for speculation to become fact, simply because there is no counter-evidence to the silence. It's a historical reminder that sometimes the most unusual event is not the thing that happened, but the thing that didn't happen, in this case, the noise that failed to carry. That quiet is the canvas. It allows us to transition from the tragic historical reality of the DeFeos to the strange, subsequent Lutz chapter. A chapter that begins with the house sitting, perfectly quiet and perfectly preserved, waiting for its next occupants to move in and shatter the historical silence with their own version of the horror. You move back toward the house, no longer looking at it as a crime scene, but as a historical waiting room. The police and forensic teams have come and gone. The DeFeo family's remaining possessions have been quietly removed, the bodies taken away, and the doors locked. The house now sits, empty and silent, through 13 long months of suburban time, the cold end of 1974, the full year of 1975, and into the start of the next winter. This period of emptiness is crucial. The grounding in history is the simple, economic reality of the home. It was put up for sale, priced far below its actual market value due to the devastating history. It was a beautiful, large house in a desirable location, but it was tarnished. In real estate terms, it was a distressed asset, and the distress was not structural, but atmospheric. Imagine the atmosphere during this time. The unusual detail is the constant stream of morbid curiosity seekers who would drive slowly by, rubbernecking at the famous house. The neighbors, initially silent about the gunshots, were now loud with gossip and speculation. This constant, low-level psychological pressure from the public began to saturate the house's reputation. The true haunting during this year was the collective anxiety of the community projected onto the empty structure. You can walk through the empty rooms now. The floors are dust-covered, the air is stagnant, and the walls feel like they're absorbing all the light. There are no sounds now, except the gentle, natural creaks of an old house settling, the sound of wood contracting in the winter cold. These are the sounds of historical time passing. It's a subtle thing. The house isn't actively doing anything, but it's remembering everything. The sheer, empty space where 6 lives used to be is a physical presence in itself. It's the ghost of memory. And this is where the light joke comes in. This house was the ultimate open floor plan nightmare, because every part of it was open to the most gruesome kind of history. No amount of staging or fresh paint could erase that listing description. The hint of mystery during this 13-month gap is what happened to the physical trauma of the crime. When a violent act occurs in a space, does the energy dissipate, or does it cling to the physical materials? Were the police successful in removing all physical trace evidence, or did some subtle residue remain? Was the cold still there, waiting for the heat to be turned up again? It's an unanswerable question, a philosophical query that the story of the Amityville Horror rests upon. If a house is haunted, does it have to be continuously occupied, or can the memory of a trauma steep like a tea bag for over a year? We don't know what happened inside those silent walls between November 1974 and December 1975, and that unknown history allows for all possibilities. But the house is not waiting forever. A family is approaching. They are named Lutz. They are looking for a bargain, a new beginning, and a beautiful home. They see the listing, they look past the history, and they see only the potential, the large rooms, the great location, the handsome structure. They are blinded by the American dream of home ownership. They're buying into a house that everyone else in town sees as a $300,000 mistake that was priced at $80,000. You hear the distant sound of a moving van, a historical inevitability. The Lutz family is about to arrive, a completely new dynamic, full of modern energy and noise, ready to challenge the overwhelming silence of the DeFeo tragedy. They are stepping into a house that has been perfectly seasoned by tragedy and quiet contemplation for 400 days. And that is exactly where our story, and the story of the Amityville ghost, truly begins its most famous chapter. The house is done waiting. The silence is abruptly shattered by the grinding brakes of a large truck, and the excited, slightly nervous sounds of a family unloading their lives. It is December 1975, and the Lutz family, George, Kathy, and her 3 children, Daniel, Christopher, and Missy, have arrived at 112 Ocean Avenue. They are the historical pivot point of this entire narrative. You watch them from across the street. The grounding in history is their sheer optimism. They were a blended family, a new unit looking for stability and a fresh start. They didn't have unlimited resources, and this house, despite its history, was a chance for them to own a large, imposing, beautiful home they otherwise couldn't afford. The $80,000 price tag, an absolute steal for the property, was the financial logic that overcame the historical horror. The unusual detail is the speed of the transaction. They closed the sale quickly, determined to be in the house for Christmas. This impatience is the first human vulnerability the house will prey upon. They rushed the process, perhaps allowing themselves to ignore the lingering atmosphere and the warnings that locals tried to whisper to them. The urgency to settle down, to create a home, overshadowed the chilling historical footnotes. You see George Lutz, a man in his late 20s, a successful land surveyor. He is the pragmatic heart of the family, and yet he is the one who will reportedly become the most profoundly affected. He carries a box up the front steps, his body language suggesting a mix of pride and a curious, immediate possessiveness over the property. Kathy Lutz follows him, directing the movers, trying to create order out of the moving day chaos. The kids are running around, momentarily turning the infamous front lawn into a normal, happy suburban play area. It's a wonderful, vibrant counterpoint to the cold, static violence of the DeFeo era. The house is now full of life, color, and noise. And yet, this noise feels strangely dissonant, like a bright melody played on a badly tuned piano. The hint of mystery here is the unseen burden George Lutz immediately reported feeling. He described an instant connection to the house, almost a physical attachment, but also a persistent, low-grade illness. The chills, a constant exhaustion, a headache that wouldn't quit. Was this the start of a genuine reaction to an unseen force, or simply the natural psychological fallout of buying a murder house and dealing with the stress of moving a family of 5? It's the first true ambiguity. I mean, who doesn't get a headache when they move? The historical headache of unpacking boxes is a universally acknowledged phenomenon. But in this house, the headache, the cold, the exhaustion, it all gets reclassified. It's no longer stress, it's supernatural attack. You step back inside the front hall with them. The house is no longer cold in the physical sense. The heat is on, and the movers are opening up the doors, letting in the brisk winter air, but also the smell of life. However, there is a psychological coldness that persists, a feeling of being unwelcome. It's the ghost of history pushing back against the new occupants. The children, in their innocence, seem to be the most comfortable. They're exploring the stairwells and the small rooms, untroubled by the story they are too young to fully understand. This is a common historical pattern in ghost stories. The children, unburdened by adult skepticism or knowledge, are often the first to interact with the unseen. The Lutz family is full of hope, but they've just walked onto a stage that was previously set for a tragedy, and they didn't bother to check the playbill. The props, the cold, the history, the silence, are all still here, waiting to be redeployed. And the house, which has been quietly observing the public's morbid curiosity for over a year, is about to get very, very busy. The moment they cross the threshold, the quiet historical truth gives way to the noisy, sensational legend. And their first official act of occupancy is about to bring a clergyman into the space. The boxes are stacked high, creating a temporary, chaotic landscape of cardboard mountains in the living room. You watch George Lutz move through this chaos with a strange mix of determination and agitation. This is where the unsettling comfort of the house truly manifests itself, attaching itself primarily to George. The grounding in history for this phenomenon is the concept of place attachment, a psychological term that describes the emotional bond between a person and a specific physical location. George Lutz reportedly felt this deeply and instantly. He loved the house. He loved its size, its aesthetic, its location. It was his. But the unusual detail is that this attachment was coupled with an equally strong, nearly debilitating sense of dis-ease. George, a non-smoker, was constantly cold and reportedly spent an unusual amount of time maintaining the fireplaces, trying to generate enough heat to overcome the perceived chill. He was driven by a need to be in the house, almost obsessively so, yet he couldn't get comfortable. He would wander the rooms late at night, sometimes staring out of the windows for hours. He reported that he was constantly waking up at the precise 3:15 a.m. hour, the time of the DeFeo murders. Now, this could be post-trauma suggestion, a fact he learned and then internalized. But the persistence of the detail, the body clock aligning itself with the historical moment of violence, is undeniably creepy. I mean, the man was essentially sleepwalking through a historical time loop. It's like buying an antique grandfather clock and realizing it rings a chime exactly when the original owner got hit by lightning. You'd probably toss the clock, or at least put a blanket over it. But George couldn't toss the house. He was bound to it. This dual feeling, The powerful magnetic attraction juxtaposed with the chronic physical discomfort is the unsettling comfort. It's the house trying to envelop and possess him while simultaneously rejecting his presence. It's the ghost of the previous resident, Ronald DeFeo, SR. Perhaps trying to reclaim his territory, or maybe it's the house itself selecting its next victim. This is the central hint of mystery. Was George Lutz actively haunted by a specific spirit, or was he suffering from the environmental psychology of the space? A house known for a brutal crime, purchased at a strange discount, under the pressure of starting a new family. All of this is a recipe for high anxiety and sleep disturbance. The house became a mirror for his own stress, reflecting it back as supernatural phenomena. The air in the house still feels thick, even with the warmth of the moving bodies. You can see George walking over to the fireplace, tapping the mantelpiece, almost communicating with the structure. He is not fighting the house. He is complying with its demands, even if those demands are merely the need for more heat, more fire, and less sleep. The story benefits greatly from this confusion. Is the haunting a product of George's mind, a self-fulfilling prophecy brought on by historical knowledge and psychological strain? Or is the house, the physical, objective structure, creating a genuine, specific psychic drain? The history provides no clear answer, allowing the unsettling comfort to continue its quiet, internal siege. But the domestic chaos is about to be interrupted by a serious, formal attempt to cleanse the history. The Lutz family, being Catholic, made the decision to have a priest bless the house before they fully settled in. They were attempting to put a spiritual cap on the historical tragedy. And this attempt will lead us to the first, clear, documented moment of alleged interaction with the unseen presence. The house is about to meet its first spiritual challenger. The day is now December 18th, 1975, just 5 days after the Lutzes moved in. The chaotic feeling of moving has barely subsided, but there is a deliberate quiet in the house now as Father Ray Pecoraro, or Father Mancuso in the most famous narrative, arrives. He is here to conduct a formal blessing of the home. The grounding in history is the simple, well-documented fact of the priest's visit. The Lutzes did indeed call a priest to perform a spiritual cleansing. This is a common practice in Catholic households, an attempt to bring sanctity to a new home, and in this case, to spiritually cleanse the very heavy history of the DeFeo murders. You follow the father into the main living areas. He moves with professional, practiced ease, sprinkling holy water and reciting the prayers. The atmosphere in the room is momentarily altered, lifted by the weight of ritual and belief. It feels like a historical moment of friction, the weight of ancient spiritual tradition meeting the fresh, raw history of modern violence. The father is then led up to the second floor, specifically the master bedroom, which was the scene of the most profound tragedy, and this is where the unusual detail of the story emerges, the vague, guttural warning. As the father enters the room and begins the blessing, he reportedly hears a clear, masculine voice exclaim, "Get out!" The voice was said to be loud, definite, and without a specific, traceable source. The father, a professional man of faith, was profoundly shaken. Now, think of the scenario. An old house, a large, empty room, a man speaking in Latin. The sound could have been a draft, a creaking pipe, or a strange acoustic reflection off the empty walls. This is the hint of mystery. Was it a supernatural warning, or a curious, localized sonic event? The history doesn't confirm the nature of the sound, only the priest's reaction to it. The father quickly finishes the blessing in that specific room, descending the stairs and advising George and Kathy not to use the master bedroom as their own. He didn't tell them why. He was vague, saying only that something bad had happened there, and he felt he shouldn't elaborate. This quiet avoidance is what gives the warning its power. If he had screamed about a demon, they might have dismissed him as hysterical. But his calm, specific, and understated instruction carried the weight of a genuine concern. This moment is vital because it establishes the first, non-family, external witness to an alleged phenomenon. The ghost story now has a corroborator, a professional man of faith, who, despite his training and skepticism, was apparently frightened enough to give a clear warning. The ghost of the house has made its first, undeniable appearance to someone outside the family. I mean, if a priest tells you not to sleep in a room, you probably shouldn't argue. It's like a mechanic telling you not to drive a specific car because the steering wheel might detach. You tend to take the expert's word for it. The story goes that the priest later tried to call the Lutzes again to warn them further, but his phone line was reportedly full of static and bizarre noises, preventing the message from getting through. Whether this detail is true or an embellishment, it serves an important narrative purpose. It isolates the family. It cuts off their link to the outside, to the spiritual help they sought, forcing them to confront the house alone. The father's simple, quiet instruction, "Don't sleep here," becomes the final historical bookmark before the true, subjective horror begins. The Lutz family will now proceed with the historical knowledge that their new dream house has an active, malevolent, and vocal presence that wishes them gone. The quiet waiting period is over. The house has issued its command. The blessing is over, the priest has left, and the Lutz family is now officially alone with their beautiful, foreboding house and a fresh, stern warning. The subtle psychological discomfort that George felt is about to escalate into something physical and undeniable. This is the period when the house begins its active, playful violence. The grounding in history for this section lies in the immediate and varied nature of the alleged phenomena that followed the blessing. The house didn't ease into it. It launched into a comprehensive, almost theatrical campaign of disturbance. The disturbances began to be timed to specific, recurring hours, most notably the 3:15 a.m. waking of George Lutz. The unusual detail we focus on is the specific focus on time. George's repeated waking at 3:15 a.m. was soon joined by other, smaller historical anomalies concerning the telling of time itself. Clocks in the house reportedly began to malfunction, with one antique wall clock allegedly stopping completely and refusing to be fixed. It was a bizarre, personal assault on the idea of order and linear progression. Imagine living in a house where the clocks refuse to acknowledge the present. It's like the house is trying to perpetually exist in that 3:15 a.m. window of the past, attempting to draw the new occupants back into its most traumatic historical moment. The house is not just haunted, it's chronologically stuck. Another phenomenon, far more aggressive, was the alleged incident with the front door. The front door of the house, a solid, heavy wooden structure, was reportedly ripped violently from its hinges and thrown into the entryway. This is a crucial distinction. This is not a subtle creak or a cold spot. This is a massive, physical, structural event that would require immense force. I mean, you need a full renovation crew, a sledgehammer, and a lot of swearing to remove a front door from its hinges. For it to be done with a sudden, violent burst of unseen energy stretches the imagination. It's almost a playful exaggeration on the part of the unseen entity, a big, dramatic gesture to announce that it has arrived and means business. It's the house equivalent of a villain kicking down a saloon door and ordering a drink. This physical violence is what separates the Amityville story from many other quiet, psychological hauntings. The house is not interested in merely whispering in corners. It wants to be felt, seen, and heard. The violence is a hint of mystery about the nature of the entity. If it can manipulate the structure of the house, stopping clocks, ripping doors, it suggests a power that is either highly localized, highly intelligent, or highly cinematic. The family now finds itself living in a constant state of low-grade siege, where the very structure of their home is an active participant in the haunting. The house, which sat so quietly for 13 months, is now moving and shaking, a whirlwind of manufactured chaos. The ghost isn't in the house is the ghost. This is the historical point where the psychological stress of living in a murder house shifts into the alleged objective reality of the haunting. The clocks stopping and the door flying off are the moments where George and Kathy can no longer reasonably explain the events away as stress, drafts, or imagination. The past is actively, physically lashing out at the present. And as the house exerts its power over their time and their comfort, the environment itself is about to regress, returning to the chilling thermal anomaly that defined the original crime scene. The cold is coming back. The house is now a place of perpetual tension. With the front door incident, the Lutz family has entered a new phase of the haunting, one defined by the return of the cold. You stand by one of the living room windows, and even though the central heating should be blasting away the December chill, you feel a distinct, profound cold radiating from the glass and the surrounding wall. The grounding in history for this phenomenon is the persistent, recurring nature of the cold as a motif in the story. It was documented by police after the DeFeo murders. It was felt by George Lutz on his first night, and now it returns with a vengeance as the haunting progresses. The cold is the baseline reality of the Amityville experience. The unusual detail is that the cold wasn't uniform. It was reportedly localized and aggressive. Imagine sitting in a perfectly warm room, but feeling a strip of air passing directly over your legs that feels like it's emanating from an open freezer door. Kathy Lutz spoke of a distinct, powerful cold spot that would follow her around the house, an unseen thermal shadow. This is the ghost of the thermal anomaly making a dramatic comeback. The house is attempting to recreate the environment of the original crime scene, that chilled, heavy atmosphere that preceded and followed the DeFeo tragedy. The haunting is, in a very physical sense, an attempt to rewind the environment to 3:15 a.m., November 13th, 1974. The physical sensation of the cold is a powerful psychological weapon. When you're cold, you are stressed, uncomfortable, and focused entirely on your own bodily needs. You are less rational, more susceptible to panic. The house, by reducing the ambient temperature, is actively lowering the psychological resilience of its occupants. I mean, you could buy the coziest blanket in the world, have the fire roaring, and still feel an icy hand on your neck. It's the ultimate energy vampire of a house, sucking the thermal comfort right out of the air. It's the world's most expensive draft. The hint of mystery is the nature of the energy exchange. If the house is haunted, the presence must be drawing energy from the environment to manifest itself, a classic trope of ghost lore. The cold is merely the byproduct of this energy consumption. But if the events are all psychological, where does the physical feeling of cold come from? Is it the body reacting to extreme stress by constricting blood flow and initiating a genuine physical chill? The history forces us to confront this question of objective vs. subjective reality. The cold feels real to the Lutzes, so it is real in the context of their experience. The cold serves as an anchor for all the other, more outlandish claims. When the house begins to get strangely infested with flies, for example, the family can always point to the cold and say, "We know something is wrong here, because even the temperature is lying to us." You watch George now, bundled in a thick sweater, moving restlessly around the living room, always trying to get closer to the faint, lingering heat of the fireplace. The house is winning the battle of comfort. The cold is the quiet, structural ghost that persists, a verifiable physical phenomenon that resists easy historical or scientific explanation. It is the signature of the house's original sin. And soon, this chilling atmosphere will be joined by a biological impossibility, a sudden, bizarre infestation that defies the season. The cold is now a constant, unwelcome resident in the house, a pressure that never eases. But now the house escalates from a thermal assault to a biological one. You are standing in the middle of the kitchen, and you notice the first, small, deeply unusual detail, a single, sluggish common housefly buzzing lazily against the windowpane. The grounding in history here is the peculiar, oft-repeated detail of the fly infestation that the Lutz family reported, specifically considering the time of year. It is December in Long Island. Flies are dormant, killed off by the frost. To find a handful of flies in a warm house might be normal, but to find a sudden, large swarm of them is biologically counterintuitive. The reports allege that the flies appeared suddenly and in great numbers, gathering in the upstairs rooms. George Lutz reportedly had to go through the house with a vacuum cleaner and spray, constantly fighting a battle against an infestation that had no logical source. The infestation would subside for a day, only to return with the same unsettling urgency. This is the biological ghost of the Amityville Horror. It's a phenomenon that speaks less of traditional spiritual haunting and more of a polluting, decaying presence. Flies are historically associated with decay, death, and foulness. Their sudden appearance suggests that, regardless of the temperature, the house is acting like a corpse, attracting the insects of decomposition, despite the fact that it is a clean, heated dwelling. This is a fantastic hint of mystery, because it forces us to consider a completely different kind of unseen presence. Is the ghost not a dead person, but a rotting idea, a locus of evil or decay that manifests through the lowest form of biological life? Is the cold an attempt to preserve this inner decay, fighting the natural breakdown process while still attracting its agents? I mean, talk about a bad review. You move into your dream home, and suddenly the house sends you 1,000 tiny biological messages saying, "This place is actively decomposing." It's the ultimate turn-off. It's like discovering the house has a subscription to the magazine Flies Weekly. The sheer absurdity of the infestation adds to the terror. It's a violation of the laws of nature, a swarm that should not exist in the heart of winter. This is the house actively demonstrating its ability to suspend reality, not just psychologically, but biologically. You can almost hear the soft, infuriating buzzing coming from the upper floors, a constant, low-grade white noise that wears down the patience of the occupants. The Lutz family is now facing a threat that can be killed, swept away, and physically fought, but that also returns with a supernatural persistence. This physical battle against the flies must have been profoundly exhausting. It was a chore that constantly reminded them that their home was actively, strangely polluted. The constant, frantic activity of killing the flies runs counter to the quiet, dignified stillness of the house during the DeFeo murders. The house has moved from a state of chilling silence to a state of frantic, buzzing decay. The flies represent a subtle shift in the hauntings target. It's moving from the atmosphere and George's psyche to the domestic peace of the household. It's an attack on their ability to have a clean, orderly home. And as the family fights this biological battle, the haunting will soon turn its focus onto the most emotionally vulnerable occupant, Kathy Lutz. Her fading energy will become the next casualty of the house's escalating campaign. The flies have been vacuumed away, the clocks are stubbornly silent, and the cold persists. The house has been at war with the atmosphere, the laws of biology, and George Lutz's sense of time. Now, the full force of the psychological stress is directed at Kathy Lutz, the matriarch of the new blended family. The grounding in history for this is the reports of Kathy's dramatic physical and emotional decline during the 28 days in the house. She was described as becoming increasingly pale, withdrawn, and prone to extreme emotional swings, from deep depression to episodes of inexplicable, furious rage. Her energy seemed to be draining away daily. The unusual detail is the specific psychological pattern of her decline. Kathy reportedly began to experience intense nightmares and visions, dreams of the DeFeo murders, seeing the victims in their beds, and experiencing sensations of being touched or even levitated. This is the haunting becoming highly personalized, targeting her sleep, her mind, and her maternal sense of security. She was also the target of a bizarre, repeated physical assault. Unexplained welts and bruises would appear on her body, especially on her hips and legs, allegedly caused by an unseen force. This takes the haunting from the purely psychological to the realm of physical battery, a terrifying escalation that suggests a highly aggressive presence. You watch her now, moving through the kitchen, attempting to make a meal for the children. Her movements are slow, her shoulders hunched. The simple, daily tasks of homemaking are becoming an insurmountable burden. She's fighting the house not with scientific investigation or spiritual ritual, but with the sheer exhaustion of motherhood under siege. I mean, the stress of a blended family move alone is enough to require a long nap and a strong cup of tea. Add in a swarm of winter flies, a door being ripped off, and the physical manifestations of a ghost, and you've got the historical recipe for a complete breakdown. It's like the house took all of her check engine lights and decided to illuminate them all at once. This fading energy is the central hint of mystery concerning the ghost's intentions. Is the presence actively trying to drive the family out through psychological warfare? Or is it attempting to possess Kathy, seeing her as the weakest link in the family's spiritual armor? The reports suggest she often felt a strange, cold presence near her, coupled with a deep, paralyzing fear that was difficult to shake. The house, in this stage, is focusing on breaking the emotional core of the family unit. If Kathy breaks, the family dynamic dissolves and George, already obsessively attached to the structure, would be left isolated and vulnerable. The ghost, or the stress of the house, is operating with a clear, almost strategic intelligence. This historical moment shows the cruelty of the haunting. It is using the domestic sphere, the sanctuary of the home, as the battleground. Kathy's struggle to maintain her energy and her sanity becomes the internal narrative of the Amityville Horror. Her decline serves as the internal temperature check for the whole experience. As Kathy struggles to keep her physical and mental health intact, the house prepares its next reveal, one that involves the physical structure itself, a hidden, secret space in the deepest part of the house, a space that might provide a physical anchor for the bizarre phenomena. It is the Red Room, and it's waiting in the basement. You move away from the domestic chaos of the main floor and descend into the cold, concrete darkness of the basement. Basements, even in normal houses, are always repositories of shadows and doubt. Here, in the Amityville house, the atmosphere is heavy with subterranean history. The grounding in history is the physical existence of the Red Room itself. It's a small, nearly hidden chamber in the basement, reportedly about 4 feet by 5 feet, tucked away behind the main utility area. It was an anomaly in the house's blueprint, a bizarre, secret space that felt like an afterthought or a purposeful concealment. The unusual detail is the actual color of the interior. The chamber was allegedly painted a vivid, unmistakable red. George Lutz initially assumed it was just a strange, unused storage room, but he noted that their dog, an Alaskan Malamute named Harry, absolutely refused to go near it, often howling or cowering when forced down into the basement. Think about the psychology of that. Why would a family paint a tiny hidden room in a basement a vibrant red? The color itself is instantly evocative. It suggests danger, passion, blood, or warning. It's the visual signature of the house's inner turmoil, physically manifested in its deepest layer. It's the ultimate do not enter sign for a storage closet. The hint of mystery surrounding the Red Room is its purpose and its rumored past. Was it simply a poorly conceived root cellar? Or, as the legend suggests, was it perhaps an old hiding spot for runaway slaves on the Underground Railroad, which was often rumored in Long Island folklore? Or more chillingly, was it used for ritualistic purposes by previous occupants, perhaps even the DeFeos? This is where the legend of the gate to hell takes root. The combination of the hidden space, the blood-red color, and the terrifying subsequent events led the Lutzes and the later investigators to speculate that this room was a focal point, a physical lens through which the entity was operating. It was a tangible, objective structure that seemed to defy the normalcy of the rest of the house. I mean, if you found a tiny red room in your basement, your first thought is probably, I need to call a contractor, not, I need to call an exorcist. But in this house, the supernatural seemed to always win the battle of logical explanation. It's the ultimate historical clue that is both physically present and utterly inexplicable in its intent. You can press your ear against the cold, painted wood of the Red Room door. You hear nothing, but the feeling of pressure, the sense of a compact, latent energy, is overwhelming. It represents the ghost of a previous intention, whatever that intention may have been. The house is a structure of secrets, and this room is its deepest, quietest confession. The discovery of the Red Room served a critical narrative function for the Lutzes. It provided a physical scapegoat for the phenomena. It gave them a place to point and say, the haunting isn't us, it's this room. This objective location made the subjective terror slightly more manageable. And as the terror becomes more tangible, the house will soon produce an even more bizarre, physical sign of its supernatural pollution, the legendary oozing walls. You emerge from the heavy, cold atmosphere of the basement, leaving the Red Room to its silent, painted secrets. You are now back on the main floor, and the haunting has moved from the unseen and the psychological to the grossly physical and absurd. The house is now literally weeping. The grounding in history for this detail is the bizarre, highly sensory phenomena of the oozing walls. The Lutz family alleged that a strange, thick, black or green slime began to seep from the walls, keyholes, and ceilings of the house. It was a liquid manifestation of the decay that the flies had previously signaled. The unusual detail is the color and consistency of the substance. It wasn't just water or condensation. It was described as having a repulsive, almost oily texture and an unsettling color that defied domestic description. It was reported to be particularly bad around the keyholes in the doors, a disturbing image of the house bleeding from its own locks. Think about the absolute psychological horror of this. The house is dissolving itself, actively rejecting the very idea of shelter and cleanliness. It's no longer a ghost, it's a leaking, grotesque presence. If the flies were the house's biological message of decay, the slime is its liquefied protest against human habitation. This is the ultimate sensory detail that grounds the absurdity of the Amityville claims. It's something you can touch, smell, and see. This is the ghost of physical pollution. It speaks to the idea that the evil or the trauma in the house was so pervasive that it chemically altered the structure, forcing the building itself to secrete the historical horror. I mean, the first time you see a green, oily substance leaking from your master bedroom door, you probably assume you have a major plumbing catastrophe, not a demonic infestation. But when the plumber comes and can't find the source, you're left with the terrifying conclusion that the house is a living entity, capable of expressing its inner toxicity. This oozing provides the central hint of mystery about the objective reality of the haunting. Was the slime a naturally occurring, if rare, phenomenon, perhaps related to a severe moisture problem or a peculiar chemical interaction within the old materials of the house? Or was it, as the Lutzes believed, a direct, supernatural secretion? Regardless of its origin, the slime served to isolate the family further. How do you explain an oozing wall to friends, neighbors, or even a journalist without sounding completely unhinged? The slime was the house's way of ensuring its secrets stayed inside. It created a layer of repulsion that kept the outside world at bay. You walk toward the front door, running your finger over the heavy wood. You imagine the oily, slick texture of the alleged slime. It's the house actively defiling itself. This is the stage where the haunting begins to target the innocence of the occupants. The house has now attacked the parents. It is about to turn its attention to the children, starting with the youngest, Missy, and her very unusual new friend. The house is slick with alleged slime. The air is thick with cold and the ghost of the buzzing flies. The focus of the phenomena now shifts to the children, who, in the historical narrative of the haunting, are always the most sensitive barometers of unseen activity. Specifically, we focus on Missy Lutz, the youngest child. The grounding in history for this is the alleged manifestation of Jody, the pig-like entity. Missy, who was just 5 years old at the time, reportedly developed a relationship with an invisible playmate she called Jody. This is a common, unusual detail in childhood development. Imaginary friends are normal. But Jody was reportedly not a nice friend, and Jody was allegedly seen by others. Jody was described as a large, pig-like creature with glowing red eyes, which is an undeniably disturbing image for a child's invisible companion. Missy would talk to Jody constantly, and the conversations became increasingly unsettling to George and Kathy. The imaginary friend was suddenly part of the house's narrative, not just Missy's imagination. The most famous and most debated historical claim is that George Lutz saw the creature. He allegedly glanced into Missy's room and saw two distinct, glowing red eyes looking out at him from the darkness. This is the moment the unseen companion becomes a physical, objective entity in the story. I mean, finding out your child's imaginary friend is a demonic, red-eyed pig is probably worse than finding out they've drawn on the wall with permanent marker. It's the ultimate parental nightmare. The house isn't just haunting you, it's corrupting your children's friends. This hint of mystery is the fundamental question of the story. Is Jody real? The innocent, playful lens of a 5-year-old child provides the perfect cover for the supernatural. If Missy believes in Jody, and the emotional energy of that belief is strong enough, could the house be using her imagination as a conduit for a manifestation? The pig motif is an interesting, quirky little detail. Some investigators, trying to find a historical root for the entity, pointed to the local history of Hog Island, now Jones Beach Island, or even the idea of a demonic familiar taking an ugly, base animal form. The name Jody itself remains an unanswerable piece of the puzzle. It just is. The presence of Jody served to further fracture the family's sense of safety. If the children are not even safe in their own minds, then there is no sanctuary left in the house. The entity has successfully breached the most guarded perimeter, the innocence of the youth. The parents were now living in a reality where they had to question whether the monster under the bed was actually a pig with glowing eyes. The historical function of Jody is to move the ghost from an atmospheric presence to a specific, named entity. It gives the haunting a character, a face, and an intention that is separate from the generalized cold or the oozing walls. It makes the entity seem highly personalized and deeply cruel, using a child's need for companionship as a weapon. As the creature moves from the psychological to the visual, the house continues its campaign on the auditory front. The next stage of the terror involves a full-scale assault on the quiet of the house, a sudden, frightening influx of disembodied voices and footsteps. The silence that enveloped the DeFeo murders is about to be utterly destroyed. Jody, the pig-like companion, is now a silent, unsettling presence, a visual threat to the family's sanity. But the house is also escalating its auditory campaign. The silence that marked the DeFeo crime scene is now completely absent, replaced by a terrifying orchestra of disembodied sound. The grounding in history is the wide range of auditory phenomena the Lutzes reported: whispering voices, slamming doors, disembodied footsteps, and strange, animalistic sounds. These noises reportedly occurred at all hours, but were always amplified during George Lutz's 3:15 a.m. waking hours. The unusual detail is the nature of the voices. They weren't just simple moans or generic ghostly cries. They were allegedly specific, conversational whispers that the family couldn't quite decipher. They would hear their names called from downstairs, only to find no one there. The voices were elusive, always just outside the range of comprehension, creating a sense of perpetual disorientation and a constant need to check and double-check. This is the ultimate psychological tool, the ghost of suggestion. The house is trying to drive the occupants insane by making them question the reality of every single sound they hear. Is that the wind, a settling pipe, or a whispered threat? In a house that is already oozing slime and full of cold spots, every sound becomes a potential signal of danger. I mean, dealing with a noisy old house is one thing, but dealing with a house that sounds like it's hosting a very loud, ghostly dinner party is another. It's like the entity decided to invest in a premium 3D surround sound haunting experience. The hint of mystery lies in the historical acoustics of the 1920s Dutch colonial. The house was a large wooden structure, likely full of drafts, creaking pipes, and acoustic oddities. Could the layout of the large chimneys and the intricate ductwork have created natural sound conduits that amplified or distorted normal household noises? This is a classic argument in historical hauntings, the belief that architectural flaws are the true source of the phenomena. A creaking floorboard could sound like heavy footsteps to an already stressed occupant. A slight draft through an old chimney could create the effect of a whispered word. But the sheer volume and persistence of the alleged sounds defies simple architectural explanation. Kathy Lutz reported hearing a lullaby being sung from her daughter's room when the child was asleep, and George claimed to have heard an aggressive, animalistic snorting that aligned with the description of Jody. The sounds were an attack on the family's ability to rest and recuperate. Constant, unexplained noise destroys sleep, leading to paranoia, stress, and eventually, the full psychological breakdown that the house seemed to be cultivating. The house, which was originally defined by its silence during the tragedy, is now defined by its cacophony of confusion. This noise is the final straw for the family. The physical attacks, the cold, and the decay have been tolerable, but the destruction of their peace and the constant presence of a voice on the wind is what pushes them toward a breaking point. But before they flee, the outside world is about to cast its first, quiet doubt on the entire narrative, bringing the light of skepticism to the chaos. The house is now a symphony of terror. The cold, the slime, the whispered voices, and the constant stress. The Lutz family is reaching the end of their 28-day stay, and the story is about to spill out of the confines of 112 Ocean Avenue and into the skeptical light of the outside world. The grounding in history for this shift is the immediate, underlying skepticism that followed the Lutz story, even before the famous book was published. While the Lutzes were experiencing their terror, outside authorities and the local press were already quietly questioning the plausibility of the tale. The unusual detail is the existence of the secret diaries of a skeptic. Though not official diaries, there were reportedly many internal notes, police reports, and journalistic investigations that questioned the Lutz's claims immediately. These were the quiet, initial thoughts of professionals who were tasked with investigating the phenomena and found little to support the grand claims. The historical truth is that the early investigators, those who came in after the Lutzes left, but before the media frenzy, found no objective evidence of the most sensational claims. They found no slime, no levitation marks, no physical destruction that couldn't be explained by a hurried move or a burst pipe. Their notes, if we could raid them, would likely be filled with phrases like "no comment," "unsubstantiated claim," and "family seemed stressed." This is the ghost of the objective truth, the version of history where the phenomena were entirely confined to the subjective experience of the Lutz family. The house may have been haunted by the psychological trauma of the DeFeo murders, but the slime, the pig, and the ripping door may have been the stress of a blended family living in a notorious house, amplified by the expectations of the local legend. I mean, imagine being the poor insurance adjuster who had to come in and file the claim for the front door ripped off by an unseen entity. That's the kind of paperwork that would make a skeptic out of anyone. The house was essentially generating its own reality, and the outside world's historical record was already contradicting it. The hint of mystery here is the motivation of the skepticism. Was the outside world simply biased against the supernatural? Or were the police and investigators seeing clear, obvious contradictions that the Lutzes, in their highly suggestible state, were either overlooking or actively obscuring? The story pivots here. We move from the intense, internal experience of the Lutzes to the external, historical analysis of the claims. The secret diaries are the historical record we don't get to read, the quiet, rational counter-narrative to the sensational one. But the skepticism wasn't the final word. Before the family made their chaotic escape, the ghost had one final, powerful narrative tool left, to borrow from the older folklore of the Long Island area, introducing a classic, unverified local legend into the mix to try and root the haunting in a deeper, more ancient kind of fear. The story of the whippoorwill and the water is next. The skeptical murmurs of the outside world are growing louder, but the house, aware that its time is short, plays its last folklore card. The haunting subtly shifts its historical roots from the modern DeFeo murders to a deeper, unverified Long Island legend. The grounding in history for this is the common incorporation of local indigenous folklore into historical ghost stories. Many ghost narratives in the American Northeast try to root the evil in the desecration of Native American burial grounds or the anger of ancient, displaced spirits. The Amityville story is no exception. The unusual detail is the specific imagery of the whippoorwill. George Lutz reportedly claimed to have seen a shadowy figure, coupled with the sound of a whippoorwill bird's call, a sound often associated in folklore with death and bad omens. The legend suggests that the house was built on a site that was once an Indian burial ground, or a place where a Native American man named Rain in Face was once imprisoned. This is the ghost of local legend, a deliberate narrative addition that attempts to give the house's haunting a historical depth far greater than the 1974 DeFeo tragedy. The story needed a villain that was not just a disgruntled recent ghost, but an ancient, elemental force of nature and land. I mean, it's a fantastic literary device. If your ghost isn't scary enough, just blame a historical injustice and a mythological bird. It's like a horror movie where they suddenly introduce a secret ancient curse in the final act to raise the stakes. The hint of mystery is that there is no concrete, historical evidence to support the Native American burial ground claim on 112 Ocean Avenue. While the land around Long Island certainly has a rich history of indigenous habitation, the specific connection to this single plot of land is entirely unverifiable folklore. The legend functions as a powerful psychological trigger. It taps into the deep, underlying guilt and fear of historical conquest. The house is no longer just haunted by the DeFeo violence. It's now cursed by the very land it sits upon, making the haunting inescapable and elemental. You look out the window toward the Great South Bay, the water. The water is the ultimate historical constant of the location. The house stands near the shore, and the vast, cold element of the bay represents a primal, indifferent force. The ghost, or the entity, is now trying to claim a connection to this primal element, positioning itself as a force of nature, not just a human tragedy. This shift to ancient folklore is the final move before the climax. The ghost has tested the family's sanity, their physical comfort, and their domestic peace. It has given them a place, the Red Room, a biological threat, the flies, and a character, Jody. Now it gives them a deep, ancient reason for the terror. Having successfully positioned itself as an unkillable force of nature, the entity is ready to make its final, most direct confrontation. The air in 112 Ocean Avenue is now electric with fear, the historical narrative reaching its breaking point. The folklore, the slime, the voices, all of it has been leading up to this final, direct interaction. The focus returns to George Lutz, who is isolated and completely exhausted by the relentless 28-day campaign of terror. The grounding in history is George Lutz's account of his final, personal, and most terrifying encounter with the presence. This was the crescendo that preceded the family's frantic flight. The unusual detail is the shift from auditory and visual phenomena to direct, physical contact. George reported that he was sitting up late, staring out into the darkness, when he felt a quiet hand on his shoulder. This wasn't a spectral caress. It was a firm, cold, undeniable weight that made him freeze. This is the ghost of physical aggression. It's the presence abandoning all pretense of subtlety, moving from whispers and thermal anomalies to a direct, tactile violation of George's personal space. It is a moment of pure, focused malice. But the contact was allegedly followed by a far more disturbing visual and auditory manifestation. George reported seeing a distinct figure materialize in the room, a tall, shadowy, cowled shape. And then he heard a loud, screaming voice in his ear that was not a whisper, but a definite, enraged sound. The figure reportedly stared at him with burning red eyes, echoing the look of Missy's friend, Jody. I mean, if a house ghost is going to be quiet, be quiet. If it's going to be loud, be loud. But shifting from a quiet hand on the shoulder to a screaming, cloaked figure with red eyes is the ultimate historical bait and switch. It's the house trying to achieve maximum dramatic effect in the final seconds of the family's stay. The hint of mystery lies in the psychological breaking point. This final encounter is the most sensational and least verifiable claim of the entire 28 days. Was the direct, physical contact the final, real act of the haunting? Or was it the product of extreme sleep deprivation, paranoia, and the overwhelming psychological suggestion of the previous weeks? The history forces us to consider that this terrifying vision might be the ghost of George's sanity. After 28 days of being harassed by temperature drops, biological impossibility, and sonic chaos, his mind may have simply created the ultimate, final, terrifying antagonist that forced him to act. The human mind, when pushed to its limits, is capable of creating extraordinary realities. Regardless of its origin, the event was successful. The quiet hand on the shoulder was the final sign-off, the last demand that the house made of its occupant. George was now convinced that the house was not just haunted, but that his life and the lives of his family were in immediate physical peril. The time for skepticism, research, or cleaning up the slime was over. The only thing left to do was flee. The house had won. The final, terrifying confrontation with the cowled figure, or the final breaking of George Lutz's sanity, happened on the night of January 14th, 1976. This event triggered the most dramatic and undisputed historical fact of the entire Lutz residency, the Great Escape. The grounding in history for this is the speed and chaos of their departure. The family fled the house suddenly, leaving almost all their possessions behind. They ran out the door in the middle of the night, only 28 days after they moved in, driving to Kathy's mother's house in a state of utter terror and disarray. The unusual detail is the abandonment of their belongings. Think about the psychological state required to leave behind furniture, clothing, treasured items, and even their pet dog, who was picked up later. They were so convinced of the house's malevolence that the physical items within it were instantly contaminated. They didn't even want to risk the time it would take to pack a suitcase. They simply needed to escape the physical space immediately. This act of abandonment is the ghost of surrender. It is a powerful, objective statement about the intensity of their subjective experience. If the haunting was a hoax for financial gain, as later skepticism suggested, why would they abandon everything they owned? The material law strongly suggests that, to them, the terror was absolutely genuine and immediate. You look around the now empty rooms. The house is full of their abandoned life, half-unpacked boxes, children's toys, clothes still hanging in the closets. The house is a perfect time capsule of domestic chaos, frozen at the moment of peak terror. The beds are unmade, the dinner dishes are not cleaned. It is a portrait of a family that broke. I mean, leaving your favorite sweater is one thing, but leaving an entire wardrobe and a dining room set is another. They essentially performed the world's fastest, least organized garage sale, with the house as the only buyer. The hint of mystery here is the silence immediately following their departure. Once the family was gone, the house went back to its 13-month sleep. No more ripped doors, no more oozing slime, no more glowing eyes. The phenomena stopped as suddenly as they began. This leads to the historical question: was the entity dependent on the Lutz family for its energy or manifestation? Did the ghost only manifest when there were people in the house who were susceptible to its influence, or who knew the DeFeo story? Or was the haunting a symbiotic relationship between a troubled family and a notorious house? The silence that followed is as historically baffling as the chaos that preceded it. The Lutzes, in their frantic flight, inadvertently created the perfect ghost story. By leaving their possessions, they provided the ultimate, non-verbal evidence of their terror. Their flight created a historical vacuum that the media and the public rushed to fill. And that rush led directly to the historical counterpunch, the unavoidable, critical question of hoax. The Lutz family is safe, but their story is just beginning its next, most complicated historical chapter. Their chaotic flight after only 28 days created a media sensation, and with sensationalism comes scrutiny, doubt, and eventually, a confession. The grounding in history for this is the well-documented fact that the Amityville Horror story was written, published, and became a massive commercial success, which is exactly when the long shadow of hoax began to fall across the narrative. The unusual detail is the confession of William Weber, the defense attorney for Ronald DeFeo Jr. Weber, sensing a financial opportunity, was reportedly one of the first people the Lutzes spoke with after their flight. Years later, he publicly claimed that he and the Lutzes created this horror story over many bottles of wine. This is the ghost of the financial motive. Weber's confession is the most powerful piece of evidence used by skeptics today. It provides a simple, logical, and entirely non-supernatural explanation for the wilder, more cinematic claims: the pig, the slime, the levitation. They were fabricated for profit. Weber claimed that the original idea was to create a sensational defense for Ronald DeFeo Jr., based on the house's malevolence. But when that failed, it pivoted into a lucrative book deal for the Lutz family. The house was essentially seen as an untapped historical revenue stream. I mean, having a wine-fueled chat with a lawyer about how to sell a story is the most unsupernatural historical event possible. It's the ultimate deflation of the terror, suggesting that the ghost was merely a collaborative historical fiction cooked up for a publishing advance. The hint of mystery here is that the Lutzes always vehemently denied Weber's claim. They maintained until their deaths that the phenomena they described were real, and they claimed that Weber was only trying to grab a piece of the spotlight and the revenue. This creates a fascinating historical deadlock, two opposing narratives, both with a vested financial interest in their version of the truth. The truth is likely a complicated blend. The initial terror felt by the Lutzes, driven by the real-life DeFeo tragedy and the psychological stress of the notorious house, was likely genuine. But the subsequent, cinematic details, the oozing slime and the glowing pig, were likely the product of exaggeration, narrative refinement, and yes, a generous amount of wine-fueled brainstorming to make the story more marketable. The historical impact of the long shadow of hoax is that it forces us to re-examine every single claim. The cold spots and the 3:15 a.m. waking may have been real, unexplainable historical facts, while the rest were historical embellishment. The true ghost is hiding in the overlap between the documented psychological terror and the undeniable financial motivation. The narrative has now come full circle, moving from the horror of death back to the greed of life. And this duality leads us to our final, lingering question. The house is quiet again, the furniture gone, the windows staring blankly out at the bay. The media circus has moved on, the books have been sold, and the movies have been made. We stand here now, at the end of the historical journey, left with the final, enduring question. The grounding in history is the continuous, real-life existence of the house itself. It has been sold multiple times since the Lutzes fled, and subsequent owners have lived there for decades, reporting no major supernatural phenomena. The house still stands, beautiful, large, and quiet. The unusual detail is that despite the lack of haunting for subsequent owners, the house's reputation remains the ghost. The home's true, enduring spirit is the story itself. The narrative of the Amityville Horror has transcended the physical structure, becoming a global cultural phenomenon that is far more powerful than any actual localized haunting. This is the final ghost we sought, the unidentified presence that lingers. It is not the DeFeo victims, it is not Jody the pig, and it is not a demon from the Red Room. The true ghost of Amityville is the unanswerable question that rests between the DeFeo tragedy and the Lutz story. The mystery is this: was the phenomenon a genuine spiritual manifestation that simply required a specific, susceptible family, the Lutzes, to activate it? Or was it a perfectly executed psychological haunting where the stress, the fame, and the knowledge of the past were enough to make a family hallucinate their way out the door? I mean, the house is just a house now, living its normal suburban life, probably thinking to itself, seriously, still talking about the pig? But the story of the house is still out there, flying around the world, creeping into bedrooms and making people check the locks on their doors. The unidentified presence is the ghost of ambiguity. It is the comfort we derive from a story that can never be entirely proven or entirely disproven. It is the perfect historical ambiguity. The DeFeo crime was real, the Lutz terror was to them real, and the Weber hoax claim was real. The space between those three truths is where the power resides. You take one final look at those two iconic, high windows staring out at the bay. They aren't the eyes of a demon. They are the windows of history, looking back at a moment of unique terror and unique confusion. The house, in the end, is just a structure, but the story it helped create is a permanent, spectral entity that is now officially part of our collective consciousness. It is a chilling historical fact that the greatest ghost in this story isn't confined to 112 Ocean Avenue. It's here with you, in the dark, in the silence. It is the story that simply refuses to go to sleep. The journey is complete. The house is quiet. The ghosts are settled, or perhaps they've just followed you home. The journey is over. You are no longer on Long Island, and the cold, heavy weight of 112 Ocean Avenue is fading behind you. The images of the silent crime, the whispered voices, and the peculiar chill are starting to soften at the edges. Your breathing is slow now. Each inhale a long, quiet drift, each exhale a gentle release of the day's worries. You are safe. The house is quiet, and the historical records are closed for the night. There is nothing left to investigate, nothing left to fear, and certainly nothing left to clean up. No oozing slime, no scattered flies, no doors ripped from their hinges. The last flicker of the narrative is just a faint, low hum, like the distant sound of the waves on the Great South Bay, too far away to truly reach you. The anxiety of George Lutz is gone. The fear of Kathy Lutz is quieted, and the house itself has settled into its long, silent sleep. Picture a single tall candle that has been burning for the entire journey. You watch the wick now, until the tiny flame bows, flickers, and then simply vanishes. The scent of the extinguished wick fades into the calm, still air of your own room. The darkness is soft and welcoming. You are not alone, but the company you keep is quiet and peaceful. Your mind is slowing down. Your thoughts are turning from complex historical mysteries into simple, smooth images. A river flowing under moonlight, the heavy, comforting fabric of your blanket, and the vast, beautiful expanse of stars gathering overhead. You are anchored in the present, perfectly safe. Let the final thoughts of the Amityville mystery drift away like smoke. The ambiguity remains, but it is no longer your problem. There's no need to decide if the haunting was real or a hoax. Just let the quiet, historical truth that the mind can be the most haunted place of all be your final, soothing thought. Your body is heavy, resting completely against the surface supporting you. Let the gentle darkness wash over you completely. You are right where you need to be. Sweet dreams.